The big question in today's budget, national debt. The minister is passionate about driving down national debt. And I know that in the South African discourse, we typically mix issues between that debt and the 500 billion rand stimulus package that we had created specifically to respond to the after effect of the pandemic. For you, what were the highlights really from the minister, as he made his points? We're obviously going to see the gross loan debt increase, but we are driving and moving to a specific point at this time. Your final thoughts related to that?
I think it's right for South Africans to be concerned about national debt because it has been spiraling out of control. We are now paying away, I think it's 20 or 25 rand of every 100 rand that we generate as a country towards servicing our debt, to interest rate payments. So if that was your salary, you would be very worried. And I think that government is very worried about it as well. And I think the minister, the reason why he didn't dance around the issue is because he knows the gravity of the situation that we find ourselves in. I'm not too worried specifically about absolute numbers because it's always expressed as a relative to the size of the economy at the time, right? So if gross loan debt is going to grow quite quickly, it's fine as long as the economy's growth outstrips that gross loan debt. Then that ratio comes down, and that's really where the trick comes in. So I think that what government is trying to do at the moment is really implore on everyone, and maybe even on themselves, that we need to grow ourselves out of this. And that is why so many different strategies was put forward in terms of how we can reignite economic growth. Because if we can grow GDP, the debt relative to that GDP doesn't look as big. But if we can't, it's going to stay an issue. Or we're going to have to reduce the debt, and by reducing the debt, probably cut spending, which is negative for growth. And then that pie just continues to shrink. So I think that's probably where the focus will lie for us going forward as well. How are they going to execute on these growth strategies going forward? And how are we going to get that ratio as small as possible?
This emphasis on growth. One of the other comments that he made during the concourse of the speech this afternoon, and Jesse, I'm going to pose this question to you, was that our borrowing requirements as a country, they're always now, at least into the medium term, in spite of certain things starting to improve in this environment, we'll typically try to keep our requirements to, above rather the 500 billion rand each year. And I think with you having worked with the stimulus funding and the national debt question, maybe can you give us some insights related to the stimulus package and where you've seen it begin to show us some green shoots in the short term, and how, of course, in looking at the bank, looking at some of the economic recovery, we will fare as we begin to move out of this pandemic phase and into the country's recovery, and how, of course, that particular stimulus package will in fact invite growth, but will also pay itself off. And if the two issues can really still sit in the same baskets, and given that they also perhaps don't even come from the same drivers or from the same consequences and reasons. Can you maybe give us some insights around that and how you either see the two issues joined together or separable?
So it's a tough question, but I suppose, we have to also look at the stimulus packages that it was necessity to do something for business South Africa. Yeah, and I think, so yes, if we had a choice as a country and said, well, to not get into more debt, that's a different story, but very few almost no countries had that option. So there's certainly green shoots about it. It was a recovery plan, and it was to make sure that we don't have business failure where we could prevent it. And so it wasn't so much that, this money is going to bring us more growth. It's actually about saying we've got to stop businesses from collapsing, because hopefully then, by them staying alive, we will then in time still have those same productive businesses bouncing back a bit, activity back, retaining those jobs, and hopefully even then growing jobs in the future. So it's a bit difficult to say, I suppose from kind of contrasting the two. Certainly, and I'll go back to my concept around this cared for capital is that's a perfect example, is that it wasn't necessarily just handouts. It wasn't grants. It wasn't about saying, all right, we're going to provide money, just to soften the blow. It was very clear that there was loan facilities, so it need to be money that needs to be repaid back. And the mere nature of that made it sure everybody that was involved in the whole lending chain needed to assess the situation, needed to assess affordability and all of that stuff to make sure that this money was actually deployed into the right places, or at least into places which we would care for that capital and return it back eventually to the government. So so look, I mean, from that point of view, it's certainly difficult to contrast the two. There are green shoots, and the green shoots are that we have seen businesses being saved with that money. At the same time, there's also another argument which is saying if the money was deployed too easily, let's say, and it wasn't cared for in that sense, then it would have been, maybe would have had an entirely different situation where we'd have to write off that money anyway, as opposed to if it was done on a more sort of structured basis and making sure that it's very well cared for and that, where it has been deployed, there's a higher chance of it being repaid back. So very difficult topic, but I suppose, yes, I mean, there is certainly success elements about it, and there's certainly learnings about it, which were unforeseen in obviously just there had to be a certain set of mechanics that had to be picked, and it's obviously easier to look back at it in hindsight now and comment on it.
To Jesse's point, it's been interesting, the learnings element, from the comment that you're coming from, and balancing the sensitivities between needing to have the criteria as opposed to just giving out the buffer to ensure that it comes back. And I think in the speech today, we certainly saw a big conscientiousness related to carefully spending money, making sure that irregular or wasteful expenditure is driven down, making sure we root out any elements of corruption in the spending for resources that are aligned to specific programs, and making sure, of course, that the different institutions that government has to make sure that those safeguards are in place, are efficient and are able to do their work. And we certainly saw some of even the strengthening and the emboldening of SARS, in the speech today in terms of their capabilities, particularly their technological capabilities in joining the different agencies and making sure that just that type of money, that type of growth, that type of revenue is being collected, does come back and is spent properly. Arabile, some of the learnings, really from coming out of this grave national debt situation, but also now on top of that having to ladle on these buffers that we've had to put in place. For you, do you feel that the minister adequately addressed, the separation, but also the dependencies of these very big elephants that we now have parked in the room? And of course, how will they go on in the medium term? Because the minister kept referring to the medium term. He was very careful not to relate to a short term or even a long term, but just keep things very measured. For us, in the medium term, looking after these dependencies, looking after these contrasting situations, these different buffers that are being put in place for the protection of the country, the economy, and so many other factors. What do you see the potential ripple effect being on the man on the street, the small business owner, the institution, sure. And how do we now make sense of that as we go forward against some of the projections made today?
I think either way it's going to be very difficult. One of the more important things is that I've always had an issue with calling it a stimulus, for example, because it's not something where, or stimulus isn't where you'd be handing out loans. Loans aren't actually a way of stimulating an economy, because at some point those people kind of have to pay that money back. So everything that they've sort of tried to gain still has to be repaid back. So that growth is almost backwards in a sense. So what you really want to do is to try and say, well, like the United States, here's a check or two. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to do that as a country, right? And I think everybody can understand that. So it's about the process, how exactly South Africa is going to take the measures it's decided on and move those forward. So if you decide that this is how you're going to do it, implement it till the end. Go all the way. There's no point in being lukewarm about it, because in the end, there will be questions. You can't, unfortunately, have a perfect solution, but you can have a solution that you believe works and you go through with it. So trying to measure out the right way through this pandemic and pushing ourselves forward into the medium term is really just based on just implementing. We've had so many plans for South Africa's growth structure. And if I just think about the last 5 years, for example, alone, right? We've had 3 different finance ministers who've all given us 3 different financial plans themselves, right? From everything from the 14 confidence boosting measures that Malusi Gigaba gave us to Nhlanhla Nene thinking about how to reconstruct our economy, right through to Tito Mbowene's decisions on how exactly to grow South Africa and the reconstruction thereof, which was then altered by the president as well. Where to? If you just take any of those plans and actually just implement it, we can change things.
As we close, we also got a forecast as part of the budget speech today that began to speak to growth and took the forecast to 2025 as part of today's speech. Policy certainty, implementation, growth, and of course making sure that there is recovery and sustainability for South Africa will perhaps some of the very, very important themes that we saw as part of the speech and we will see as part of the commentary as it rolls forward. From each of you, as we now close our discussion, the future forecast, realistic or not, and with those themes, which ones for you are the ones you'll be taking forward into the work that you do, the institutions that you serve, and of course the economic interests that you go on to support?
I think the forecasts are reasonable, but I think execution risk is high. And execution risk is high because we don't have a history of executing. And I think that's where the trick is going to come in. In terms of my work, I focus on markets and investments. I think there are some really good takeaways here. I think government understands that savers, investors, and the tax base is reasonably stretched, and you can't really play around with taxes too much at the moment. And I think that government understands that they need to get the budget in order, because without that we are going to have a problem in our bond markets, and if government can't raise its own funding, it's a pretty bleak spiral from there. So because I think government understands this, I'm still comfortable with making South Africa my investment destination of choice, particularly because I plan to be here forever. So in terms of asset liability matching, it all still makes sense to me.
As Chantal said, there is an execution risk here that is very high. We tend to be a little bit more positive than perhaps we need to. Over the last couple of years, we've only really ever had growth trajectories that we've actually downgraded on a consistent basis, right? So, it's unfortunate that then is the measure by which we will continue to see things. We will just think that National Treasury, the Reserve Banks, all the other institutions are going to look at us and go, well, we're probably going to have to downgrade this growth level because we don't actually boost the economy sufficiently. And yes, it does need to still be the investment destination of choice. And the only reason for that is because, it's a confidence game. The more of us depart and take money out, in a sense, the less you have as, one, a pool to grow, but two, a way of developing and creating a society where more people want to actually pull together and bring a whole lot more to the country. So I think there's going to be a whole lot more revisions, personally, and the hope is that it's not too far gone.
Maybe if I came at it from a bit of the small, medium business side of things, is that, it's very much around value chains at the moment now. So value chains and supply chains, I get, but if you think about it, the world markets on many of the commodities we're seeing, mining, the prices are going through the roof. South Africa is a huge producer, in that space. The value chains connected to the mining industry are significant. If money's flowing right down to all the suppliers and ancillary services, it benefits small businesses, it benefits the whole economy. We're seeing record rainfalls. Our agri sector is poised for significant growth, huge exports on the horizon, also, foreign currency based trades. And I suppose, the only thing is if we could get our tourism sector back up and running, obviously depending on how the world shapes, but that's a massive value chain in this country which provides huge amounts of employment and growth. So I think it's fair, it's going to be quite interesting, and I think that we are maybe better positioned as as a country than many think in terms of what this means now economically of where we happen to find ourselves.
So thank you. Thank you to my amazing panel this evening for really articulating the terminology, the technicalities, the detail, the challenges, the very real world practicalities of making a country work. Because really the budget for most of us, as it is read today and we go out and interpret it tomorrow, really sets the tone for what will happen in institutions, in our economy, at our desks, and in society around us as we kickstart a year. I'm crossing both fingers and toes that we will not have a year much like the one we have just come out of. And on many, many fronts, it's almost a miracle we survived it as a country and as an economy. But I certainly hope that as the miracle unwinds, it brings more magic, it brings more green shoots. It continues to remember that it was developed to be pro-growth. And as the revisions come, because it's a learning process for a developing country and a state much like ours, there are not going to be revisions that will take us back and are revisions that will turn into new strategies and more documents, but will actually turn into a country at work and an economy that remains sustainable and one that is competitive, and you and I will continue to invest in. So thank you to you, Chantal, to you, Arabile, to you, Jesse, this evening for your insights, for unpacking the content of that speech as eloquently and as rapidly as we did, because this is a subject we can talk about into another few days. And what I certainly hope we were able to do tonight was really highlight some of the impact, some of the imperatives, and some of the very important action notes for the South African at home, the South African at work, the South African running a business, and all of those around them that help them create impacts in society, deliver services, and ultimately add value to South Africa's growth story. My name is Lynette Ntuli, and it's been an absolute pleasure to host FNB's Budget 2021 post panel as we reflect on this year's budget.